So welcome to the Apparitions and Manifestations. I'm going to start this evening with some acknowledgments and thanks. And I first want to thank each of you, truly. I mean, I'm really deeply honored that you all took time out of, I know these times are incredibly busy schedules, so I'm really honored that you all took time to come be with me and to look at this work. So thank you. I really very, very appreciative. So I look on this time, this evening, not as a time to tell you about my work, but as an opportunity to open a conversation about some of the ideas I'm attempting to express through these photographs. So thank you on that front. So a few more things. So first, I want to thank my wife, Jennifer, and my son, Elton, for their tolerance, patience, and guidance over the last year and a half, which, believe me, they took a lot of patience while this work was produced. And I couldn't have done it without you, so thank you both. Let's see. Also want to thank Megan Ricupsel, whose support for everything from installing to lighting to marketing to sharing to getting food to all this sort of stuff. So thank you, Megan. I couldn't have done it without you either. I also want to thank the gallery attendants, wherever you all are. Thank you for sitting the show and being here and telling people what they can touch and what they can't touch. So thank you for that. And let's see, I want to thank the Visual and Performing Arts Department for their support while I was away making on this work. And I want to thank the Dean's Office and Steve Fowl and the Office of the Dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, and Loyola University for the chance to take a sabbatical during the 21-22 academic year. And for the opportunity to exhibit the results of my sabbatical on the walls of this gallery. I understand what a profound privilege it is to be able to do this. I mean, not everyone gets a chance to sort of somebody say, hey, here's a gallery, show it up with work. And so I'm deeply thankful for that opportunity. It really is a blessing and an opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful to the university for that. So as I mentioned, I was on sabbatical last year. So some of you think, yeah, what's that? You just took time off, you like went on vacation. So I'm going to talk just real briefly about what a sabbatical is, especially for those of you who may not know what that means. So first, logistically, you're right. It means you get a time off from teaching to do your research. And for some of us in the visual arts, that means making artwork. But of course, there's a more complicated and nuanced meaning to the word. The word comes from the Hebrew word sabbat, or Sabbath, or a day of rest, a time of worship given in the Bible as the seventh day. This is not to say that sabbatical is a time to sit around and do nothing, but instead is a time to reflect, recharge, and revive, which I deeply needed. As I mentioned in my artist statement, which I hope you all get a chance to read, the beginning of the sabbatical coincided with my end of time as the chair of the Visual and Performing Arts Department. And while it was a great honor, and I feel honored to be able to serve as chair of the department, it also demanded so much of my time and mental space that my artwork atrophied. I desperately needed a sabbatical or a Sabbath. I needed time away to sort of revive myself. So I'm going to take a moment here just to briefly explain the process, particularly these images that are on the back wall here, which are made during the sabbatical, which are called relievo ambrotypes. So the ambrotype is made by using the wet plate collodion process. And while I love the results of the wet plate collodion, it's a complicated process that is prone to disaster from the beginning to the end, truly. And one of the distinctive aspects of the wet plate collodion image is that the process that each photograph is unique. People are all saying, it's unique. It's like, well, really? So unique means that it's one of a kind. So each of these images back here that are glass are one of a kind. That's it. They're not reproducible. I can make another image, I can make another photograph, but you can't reproduce those. Those are truly unique. So also then the image, since it can't be printed from anything else, the image on the glass must be produced in the camera, which is what that camera is back here. So the size of the camera dictates the resulting size of the image. So look, in some sense, an 8x10 image is, compared to these, is pretty small. But I had to have, a larger camera in order to make a larger plate. So the camera dictates the size of the images. So you need a larger camera. So simply focusing that camera back there can take hours, truly hours, not to mention the staging and lighting the subject. So the whole process can take a couple days. I mean, not truly. I mean, it's sort of set the camera up, to get everything set up, to get it staged, to get the light, to get the focus. Before you even think about making an image, can take a couple days to go through that whole process. So once the subject is staged and illuminated, and the camera's ready to go, I must set about exposing a plate. So in brief about the process, first I must cut the glass to size, and then burnish the edges, clean and polish the glass, and coat the edges with albumin. Anybody know what albumin is? Probably had some this morning for breakfast.
Egg white.
Egg white. So it's egg white, so you coat the edges of it with egg white. And then I take that plate, pour a solution of collodion over it, which is a combination of this sort of viscousy material that's like that's cotton that's been soaked in ether, so it turns into this like hero syrup stuff, and it has potassium iodide in it. So at this point, it's not yet light sensitive. But then you take that plate and slide it into a bath of silver nitrate, and those chemicals combine to make light silver salts, which are light sensitive. So then I take that glass plate, put it into a light type film holder, bring it out into this camera, and make the exposure. In the exposure, with using the strobes, sometimes I will have to fire the strobe off 10, 20, 30 times. So pop, 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 because it's such a low sensitive. It takes a lot of exposure to make it work. Then after the exposure, take that back into the darkroom, take the glass plate, and some of you guys have probably been in a darkroom before, but you put that, when you have photo paper, you put it in the developer, you shake it in the developer, you rock the tray back, you have a good minute and a half to process that print. These, you have 10 seconds. So you take that glass plate, you pour that developer on the plate for 10 seconds, and you pour it off. So another step where it's prone to problems. If you don't get exactly coated on it properly, it doesn't get developed evenly and properly. So that's another place where mistakes can happen. So then once that's done, you fix it, you make it no longer light sensitive in potassium cyanide. Yep, that stuff. Then you wash it, you dry it, you hand color it, and then you varnish it. And that's without even talking about the digital images back behind it. So it's a complicated, slow process. I love it, but I love it, but it's tedious. So back to my need for my sabbatical. As I mentioned, my art making had atrophied. I tried working with the wet plate process, but as laborious as it was, I reflected back on the images when I was finished them, I was dissatisfied with the results. And I found out that I was taking pictures. I wasn't making photographs. I was struggling to see photographically. I could see visually, but I couldn't see photographically. I couldn't make the compositions happen the way I wanted to. I needed something more immediate that would allow me to make more photographs. So in order to revive my photographic practice, I needed to make hundreds, thousands of photographs to sort of get me back in the practice, get me back in the groove. So I turned to my digital camera. So on a quick slide tangent, in addition to working on my own photographs while I was on sabbatical, I was doing research on a new class which I'm offering for the first time this semester, spirit photography. So I read numerous books on spirit photography, consciousness, Zen, cosmology, and one concept that I became very acquainted with during my studies is pareidolia. Anybody know what pareidolia is? You probably experience it often. It's essentially pattern recognition, being able to sort of see things, make things out of your mind that may not necessarily be there. It's often think about or pattern recognition, which we normally think about seeing faces in ordinary things, like the face in an outline. So it's the kind of thing where you see something, it's like, oh, that's a face, but it's not a face, but it looks like a face, but is it a face? So that's pareidolia, where we sort of project into things to see images where there really isn't any. So another parallel concept that I began to explore while I was working this was how our consciousness constructs things which are not really there. How do we see these things? So a part of the staying power of spirit photography was the intersection of these two concepts. So people saw faces or spirits where there may only have been smoke, and they thought they recognized faces of loved ones because they wanted to. Not necessarily because it was their aunt or their uncle, but because, yeah, that looks like my aunt. I think it is. So they sort of projected into it. So back then to my atrophied photography vision. With my mind filled with these readings of Zen and spirits and cosmology and consciousness, I walked around our property and simply looked. It's the first time that since I had my sabbatical that I could really look. I'd seen a lot, I've been sort of doing a lot of stuff, but I couldn't really look photographically. And there's an opportunity to do that. So with my camera, I began to walk around and look. Excuse me a second here. So I simply looked, and in short, I was granted a sabbatical so I could go hunt for ghosts. And I found them nearly everywhere. Everywhere I looked, I saw figures, faces, spirits. I found them. Of course, they weren't real, but I saw them. This led me to read more about consciousness and how we as Homo sapiens interpret what we see. How much is really there, and how much do we project? In short, it's a necessary balance. That we have to have that sort of relationship between what we actually project into things, what we bring to the conversation, versus what we're actually hearing. Like, for example, I'm making these sounds here. But if you speak English, you know how to speak English, you know what you can translate these sounds I'm making into words. So you bring something to the conversation. So if you were a French speaker and never spoken English, and I'm talking to you, you can't bring the right material to the conversation. So you're bringing something to the conversation. So that it happens all the time. So there's this crucial balance between how much we actually see and how much we project into what we see. So finally, and then I'll stop and answer questions you have. I want to mention one photographer who's been a great influence on my work throughout this process, Minor White. Minor White was a Zen photographer. He practiced Zen through his camera. What he saw through his camera was certainly there, but it was also a stepping off point to a deeper consciousness. They became something else. Moreover, he understood that the resulting photographs were abstractions from what was in front of the lens. For him, these abstractions didn't remove the subject from its initial context, but instead distilled the essence of the subject into a single two-dimensional frame. Moreover, understanding that there was no one way to interpret his photographs, he was interested in what happens in the viewer's mind between sequence photographs. What does the viewer bring to the conversation already going on between the two photographs? These are the questions that interest me, the conversations that photographers are having with each other, and how you all bring your consciousness to add another voice to the conversation, to the discussion. How much of what you see is a manifestation of my vision, and how much of it is an apparition of your consciousness? So, thank you.